If you see with the preparations for the operation in Rafah, which I think is wholly necessary to destroy Hamas, that they're building they're building facilities now to provide shelter, food, medical assistance for civilians who must leave Rafah, about 1 million of them, in advance of that operation. The hard thing about the IDF situation is Hamas deliberately uses people as human shields. And sadly, the Egyptians did not open that border to provide kind of a relief valve to move those civilians out.
Well, joining me now is General HR McMaster, who was a military commander in all of America's recent significant military engagements, and then was a United States National Security Advisor under the Trump administration from February 2017 to April 2018. Good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, Adam. Great to be with you.
I wanted to ask you, first of all, really for a global view. We've had British politicians, the Defence Secretary and the Prime Minister, talking about the West now being in a pre-war phase in global terms. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with it, and I'm so glad to hear it. I mean, I don't agree with everything President Macron says, but I was glad to hear him kind of ring the alarm bells, because we have to act in a resolute manner, I think, to prevent I think these crises we're seeing today, these wars we're seeing today, from cascading further.
And where do you see the primary threats coming from?
Well, the threat is coming from what I would call an axis of aggressors, and this is obviously Russia and China. Remember, they declared Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin declared their enduring love for each other and their partnership with no limits just prior to the Beijing Olympics, and just prior to the massive reinvasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. And you see them working in concert with one another, covering for each other with, from a diplomatic perspective, Chinese wolf warriors perpetuating the lie, that this is a war against NATO aggression or against Ukrainian Nazis. But then you see material support, obviously, from China in terms of buying more and more Russian oil and gas to feed Putin's ATM, or to provide him with the components and the hardware and equipment necessary to sustain his war-making machine. Iran is part of this axis as well, with Shahed drones and Russia's reciprocal assistance to Iran in perpetuating wars across the Middle East and Syria and so forth, the cover that Russia's given to Hamas, and so you also have North Korea, who's part of this axis. And I'll tell you, Adam, I mean, at the very least, these aggressors will accelerate their efforts to accomplish their objectives in one region based on their assessment that we're preoccupied with these other crises.
And how, given that we are not directly engaged in hostilities with Russia or China, what more can we do now to stop this escalating?
Adam, we have much more power than we use, especially in the area of economic power. I think it's really important for us to counter, for example, Chinese economic aggression against us, the weaponization of its statist mercantilist model against us. And we can do this by making our supply chains more resilient. I think every corporation in the free world should take a Hippocratic oath to do no hurt or harm, either by aiding and abetting the Chinese Communist Party in developing a differential advantage over our militaries. Hey, don't help them perfect their technologically enabled Orwellian police state or to commit genocide. I think maybe genocide might be an ESG issue in boardrooms. And then finally, don't compromise the long-term viability of our industries and our workers' jobs in exchange for short-term profits. So we wield tremendous economic power. The United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, and Japan, if we work together, I mean, who's going to really counter us? And then the second key thing we can do, invest in hard power. And I think this is what President Macron was quite clear on recently. Hard power matters. This idea that you can just threaten sanctions and have sternly worded diplomatic messages. We think about the run up to the reinvasion of Ukraine. We should take a hard look at why we failed to deter really the first major land war in Europe since World War II.
The UK, as you know, it has just upped its proposed defence spending to 2.5% of national wealth by the end of this decade. Is that enough?
I don't think it's enough. And not that I'm the best person to judge this, but I don't think we're spending enough on defense in the United States. And the reason is we have allowed our defense not only capabilities in terms of the integration of emerging technologies into our military formations, but our capacity has atrophied under this assumption, Adam, that smaller and smaller forces could have bigger and bigger impacts over wider areas because of our differential advantage in technology. Well, guess what? China, others have caught up, or they've developed countermeasures to our most exquisite capabilities, like stealth capabilities, for example. And so what we need to do is field countermeasures to those countermeasures, but also we have to recognize that, hey, the size of our forces matters. And we need much larger air, ground, maritime, cyber, and space forces.
You served alongside British forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. In both of those cases, the British had to sort of withdraw really from some of the mission which they had chosen. So, I mean, how important is the British military now?
The British military is immensely important. First of all, the British military brings a tremendous skill set in terms of their professionalism, their professional knowledge, but also these are cohesive teams that are capable of fighting under tough conditions. And I just hope that all of our militaries jealously guard our warrior ethos. It's a great book by Christopher Coker, who's a wonderful scholar in the UK, called The Warrior Ethos. And what he writes about in that book, in his book, The Warrior Ethos, is that how popular culture cheapens and coarsens the warrior ethos. And the warrior ethos is kind of under assault by some of these reified philosophies associated with postmodernist or critical theories. And, warriors, have to be a cohesive team that of tough, courageous people who are bound together by common purpose, a sense of honor, and are willing to sacrifice for one another. So we
I mean,
talk about combat power in terms of like numbers of weapon systems, but really there's a less tangible element of combat power, and that's the moral and psychological combat power of cohesive teams like exist in the British Army's regiments.
I mean, I asked that question because our manpower is at the lowest it's been for 2 centuries in terms of numbers, and also because the late Donald Rumsfeld referred to British military forces as a workaround. Another American generals recently said that UK forces were no longer in the first division. Do you see it like that?
Well, it's an issue of capacity, and we're struggling with this in the United States in terms of recruiting. I think what's happening is that like large numbers of young people don't understand the tremendous rewards of service in our military. In popular culture, in the way that the military or veterans are portrayed, they're portrayed as fragile, traumatized human beings. But the vast majority of veterans who come out even out of the most harrowing experiences come out stronger, and they go on to make tremendous contributions, not just within the military, but in other walks of life, and the rewards of service. I mean, being part of a team that becomes really a family that's bound together, by this sense of common purpose, by this mutual trust and respect, and really affection. I mean, I don't know where else that's replicated, in life. And so I would just say to our young people, volunteer to serve in our military. You don't have to serve I've served for 34 years. My plan was to serve for 5, but I served for a bonus 29. You don't have to do that, but I think we need to attract more of our most talented men and women into our military service. And there should be a call to service from our political leaders. I don't think we have really made that call.
On the immediate conflict with that axis that you mentioned, clearly Ukraine, that the war there is underway. What more needs to be done to ensure that Ukraine is not defeated?
Give them everything that they need. I mean, Adam, what is disappointing to me is the degree to which we have tried to manage our support for Ukraine. And this kind of, I guess, if you get educated in some of our top law schools, you believe that in war, you can manage the war instead of try to win it. But, actually winning should be the objective in war, not only because it's counterproductive if you do anything less than try to win, because in war, each side tries to outdo the other, but it's also unethical. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas told us, that for a war to be just, you have to have a just end in mind. And so when we talk about, as long as it takes, hey, what is the it? It means a free, independent, sovereign Ukraine that's in control of its territory and has the defense capabilities necessary to deter future aggression. And so I think, then we can begin to judge: are we providing enough capabilities and in sufficient capacity for them to do what they need to do, which is stop the onslaught from the Russian military, and second, generate the offensive capability to regain control of their territory.
The other live conflict at the moment is Israel, Gaza. Now, there, public opinion, certainly on college campuses in the United States, and we've seen big demonstrations in this country as well, does not seem or does not support assisting Israel or even lending moral support to Israel in this conflict.
Well, I think this is due to a degree of ignorance, as well as the consequences of really decades of our young people being subjected to what I would call the curriculum of self-loathing in higher education. And this is really the degree to which many humanities departments in our best universities have become captured, by the new left interpretation of history melded together with various postmodernist and critical theories, in which we learn and we teach our young people, that all the ills of the world prior to 1945 were due to colonialism. All the ills of the world after 1945 were due to capitalist imperialism. We're the problem in the world. And it's a profoundly arrogant interpretation of history because it doesn't acknowledge the agency or the authorship over the future that others have, including our adversaries, enemies, and rivals. Hey, Vladimir Putin, Hamas leadership, the supreme leader in Iran, Xi Jinping, guess what? They have aspirations. They are go far beyond anything in reaction to what we do. And so we have to recognize, as the great theologian and philosopher G.K. Chesterton said, war is not the best way of settling differences, but it may be the only way to ensure they're not settled for you.
But do you feel that what Israel has done in Gaza has been disproportionate?
No, I don't. But I do believe that they could have applied firepower with greater discrimination. I believe that they could have done much more to ameliorate the suffering of the civilian population. And I think maybe, hopefully, that the Israeli Defense Forces recognize that now. If you see with the preparations for the operation in Rafah, which I think is wholly necessary to destroy Hamas, that they're building facilities now to provide shelter, food, medical assistance for civilians who must leave Rafah, about 1 million of them, in advance of that operation. The hard thing about the IDF situation is Hamas deliberately uses people as human shields. And sadly, the Egyptians did not open that border to provide kind of a relief valve to move those civilians out. Adam, when we did a major military operation against Al-Qaeda in Iraq, who had choked the life out of the city of Tel Afar in Nineveh province, a much smaller city in terms of population, 250,000 people, we were able to evacuate those civilians in advance of the military operation and provide support for them. The other thing that we had going for us is we had a lot of Iraqis as trusted partners. The problem is, based on Hamas's control of Gaza since 2005, given the history of Israel and the Palestinians, that trust doesn't exist among large numbers of the population. But I think what the Palestinian people, have to conclude is that their grievances trace back primarily now in these recent years to Hamas. And and so what's necessary, for the security of Israel and also for the welfare of the Palestinian people is that Hamas is gone. And there has to emerge some form of political order, some security order that is not Hamas, that is not a jihadist terrorist organization, that is not determined to destroy Israel and kill all the Jews. So, we have people who lament, there's not progress toward a two-state solution. I mean, Hamas has already dedicated itself to the destruction of Israel and the murder, as they did on October 7th, of all the Jews. You have to remember, they've said, the Hamas leadership has said, we want every day to be like October 7th, 2022. How could Israel, or 2023, how could Israel not continue this operation against them?
You are, I think, or have been on the board of Zoom and also an AI company. How is new technology changing war fighting capability? And is it one where we in the West, we in the NATO allies have the advantage or not?
I think we do have the advantage, but you have to remember, that there are all sorts of countermeasures to even the most advanced capabilities. So, for example, now in Ukraine, we're seeing the ubiquity of these first-person view or FPV drones, and the degree to which they've had an impact on the battlefield. I think what you're also seeing is a battlefield that is more transparent. That every force, all forces, look, for example, at the very successful Ukrainian long-range precision strike against a training area where Russian forces probably felt pretty safe, and so every element of the military now has to operate as if they're in visual range of the enemy. These are all new dynamics, but I think, Adam, what's important to note as well is that new forms of warfare don't replace the old. Oftentimes, they're just grafted onto the old, and that's why in Ukraine, we see some significant changes in the character of warfare. But we also see some significant continuities. I mean, parts of those battlefields look like World War One. So I think we can't assume that new technologies are going to fundamentally change the character of warfare, but the character of warfare will continue to evolve. And of course, there are always countermeasures, right? You have the machine gun and the tank, the anti-tank missile, the submarine, the sonar, the bomber and the radar. How about the Black Sea Fleet and these very capable maritime drones that Ukraine has been employing.
You have, since leaving the White House, you have wanted, or leaving the administration, you haven't talked that much about it, but now you're writing a book about called At War with Ourselves, My Tour of Duty in the Trump White House. Why have you decided to do that now?
Well, I had always planned, to write about my experience there because, in a large measure, I feel it's my duty as a historian to do that. And of course, I'd assumed, like many people had, that President Trump would be off stage rather than at center stage politically. But I think the time's right to do it. I mean, I really hope and believe that we can learn from history. We've demonstrated, I think, our inability to do so, in recent years. But that's the spirit in which I wrote that book, is so that we can learn from my personal experience, which I try to place in historical perspective, and apply those lessons to the many challenges that we have today.
And do you back him, or would you like to see President Biden reelected?
Hey, I'm not a very political person. Adam, I was fired by both presidents. I was fired by President Trump, and I was fired by President Biden from the Board of Visitors for the United States Military Academy. So that has bolstered, I think, my bipartisan, nonpartisan credentials.
Well, I mean, having worked with him, would it worry you if he was back in the Oval Office?
Well, I think we should be worried about anybody who takes office these days because they're facing daunting challenges, and I think what we owe it, whoever gets elected, whether it's in the UK or the US or in France or anywhere, all the citizens of that country should, once they're elected, try their best to help that person succeed, because, you know, the stakes are higher than any one person these days.
General McMaster, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Adam, thanks for the privilege of being with you.